Yeah. We are working our way through Matthew 5. It's dramatic to hear that whole chapter read to us there. We are working our way through it kind of slow, but I want to remind you that Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is an example of Jesus' teaching as he went about proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of heaven. We're told in Matthew 4, right before it happens, that the crowds are starting to grow larger and larger, and Matthew is, like I said last week, he's one of those good note takers. He's one who has 5 different sermons or discourses in his gospel where more than any of the other ones about these sermons that Jesus taught. And we believe that they're all examples of ones that he gave over and over again, pronouncing or exclaiming, announcing the good news of the kingdom of heaven. Now, when you go to this list and you hear it read, many times what it produces in folks is that then they're supposed to try to become what that list is. And I keep coming to this every week, and in fact today, I've tried to arrange, we'll see how I manage my time, but I've tried to arrange it where I can have a Q&A at the end. So if you've had questions come up as we talked about the Sermon on the Mount, then today's the time when we'll answer them, and we'll kind of cuss and discuss them together as we get to the end. Hopefully more discuss than cuss. But let's, when you read this, you think of a list of things that, if blessed are the poor in spirit, then I need to be poor in spirit. I need to mourn. I need to be meek. I need to be hunger and thirst for righteousness. Or tonight, merciful. And you think that, well, I've got to do those things in order to be blessed. And I believe what Jesus is doing is he's looking on the crowd and he's seeing those people in the crowd that the world normally doesn't recognize as the winner, as the one who's out in front, the one who is really blessed. He's coming in a culture where inside of his culture, if you were blessed, then your life worked. And if your life didn't work, they said it's because you were not blessed. And Jesus says, no, on the contrary, what's going on is that the kingdom of heaven is expanding into all kinds of people who have their life together, certainly, but also people who don't have their life together. And we've taken a chance to kind of break down what it looks like to be poor in spirit, to mourn, to be meek, and to hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I've got 2 to go over with you tonight, but in order to do it, and I've really wrestled so far with this message in terms of how to explain it to you. I thought what I would do is I would take you to some places where Jesus uses the words and put them in a context of his teaching, and then we'll come back and look at what it means to be merciful and what it means to be pure in heart. Okay, so I want you to turn with me. Oh, before I do that, I just thought I'd show some pictures. One of the folks that were on the trip with us this past February to Israel, there's a church there that I showed you some views from the church. It's the Church of the Beatitudes, and I almost went too quick, and I was going to show these pictures. So here's some pictures of the church that is there now that marks the place where traditionally Christ gave this message. The truth is that it's too far up on top of the hill. The place where Christ gave the message was farther down the hill, but go ahead and go through them. It's a beautiful church in a beautiful area. The area of north of the Sea of Galilee is just an awesome area, and there's a door there and some of the stained glass windows. So let me turn with you to Matthew chapter 18, beginning at verse 21, and just listen to this teaching of Christ as he talks about the parable of an unmerciful servant. Peter came to Jesus and he asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? 7 times? Which would have been a statement of great religiosity. I mean, that would have been going way beyond what the normal teaching of the day would have been. He says, the most rabbis would say you should forgive someone 3 or 4 times. What if I went all the way to 7? Would that be good? And Jesus says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Now, 10,000 talents, a talent is roughly 75 pounds. So we don't know if it's a talent of silver or a talent of gold. If it's a talent of silver, it's 20 years' wages. and he owes 10,000 talents. The point of the matter is not how much it's worth several $million. The point of the matter is it's a sum he could never, ever repay. Okay, so don't try to don't go, well, a talent, what's the price of silver now? And some of y'all are getting your phone out and you're trying to figure it out. And you know what? Don't go down that rabbit trail. I already Googled the heck out of this thing and it don't matter. Okay? What it means is basically this dude owes more than he can ever repay. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him and, "Be patient with me," he begged. "I'll pay back everything." Servant's master took pity on him and canceled the debt and let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. Now, a denarii is a day's wage. So this is not a super small. It's a third of a year. This guy owes him 100 days, over 3 months' wages. But compared to what he's just had canceled on his behalf, millions and millions of dollars, in Jesus' day, a denarii was about 16 cents. And the truth of the matter is that many places in the world, a day's wage isn't much more than that today. He grabbed him, began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and he begged the exact same thing this guy said earlier. Exact same words almost. "Be patient with me, and I'll pay you back." But he refused. Instead, he went and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay back the debt. And when the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told the master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in and said, "You wicked servant, I canceled all the debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In anger, the master turned him over to the jailer to be tortured until he could pay back all he owed. And this is how your heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Very strong warning there. Jesus is trying to teach that it's not a matter of counting and earning and keeping score and trying to figure out, well, I've forgiven you 3 times, that's all that's demanded. It's that you should live in a recognition that what you have gained could never have been earned. And because you have been given much, there is much expected of you. Let me turn you just a few more pages to the right to Matthew chapter 23. I want to give one more story or one more teaching of Jesus, and then we'll jump into some of the things. In Matthew 23, Jesus is giving another stern warning to the religious people of his day. And he goes through and says, "Woe to you," several different times. In fact, at least 7. I want to draw your attention to verse 25. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites." And in 6 of the 7 woes that he pronounces, he says that it's to hypocrites. "You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs who look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead man's bones and everything unclean." Pray with me. God, it's a difficult balance for us to be able to read this list of things in the Beatitudes and not try to come away with something to do. It's difficult for us to understand Christ's teachings in a culture where we're wired to do and to keep lists and to accomplish and to earn. It's difficult for us, truth be known, to be merciful and to be pure in heart, to have the kind of integrity that represents purity. God, we commit our time here. I have clearly already confessed to you several times that unless you teach us today, I will get all in the way and muddle this thing up. So we submit this time to you, asking that you would transform us out of the thoughts of gaining and earning and religion, and you would move us towards grace, mercy, and love. In Jesus' name, amen. What happens for us here is that after he has kind of laid this out, now he begins to say, blessed are the merciful. And at first, remember now, the context is he's looking in the ones that don't normally have life work for them. Jesus is proclaiming the good news that they're involved in the kingdom as well, and they are blessed. And the word for blessed means, kind of in our vernacular, it would be God is on your side. He is with you. He's on your team. And he's gone through several different things where he said, blessed are the poor in spirit, or the B-teamers, the losers in our culture, the ones who can never really get their life together. And in that kind of a context, we look at mercy and say, well, mercy sounds like such a good thing. How is it that life doesn't really work for mercy? Well, the truth of the matter is I've looked at my own life, we don't really do mercy well. Some of you do. Some of you have the spiritual gift of mercy, and you're very, very kind. You're almost sticky. You're so sweet with things. But the truth is the matter, as a people, as a culture, as an American culture, what we do really well is not mercy. We do justice well. We do justice. And really what we mean when we talk about justice is we mean it's for just us. It works out for us. It's fair and equitable for us. Don't bother me with the facts. Just make sure that I get mine. And those who are merciful are the ones who kind of get stuck in the middle of it and get yanked around from side to side. The one whose heart gets wrenched with people's failures and people's letdowns and people's own hard times. And we see these folks and we admire them. We're glad they're there. And when we're really down, we might want to go to them. But we're not really going to go to them if we want to see some things happen or if we want a fair assessment about what's going on. We would never go to them and if we're trying to rationalize our own behavior about how we defended the justice that was really ours. We would never talk to them about how we're taking a situation and while we were driving and how it was justifiable that I got right up on that person's rear end because they had cut me off. I mean, we would never talk to a person of mercy about things like that. We would never talk to a person of mercy about the kinds of things that we would do behind the scenes, either passive-aggressive or maybe outright aggressive in the workforce to make sure that we got ours and people understood that it was our promotion that did it. It was our genius. It was our gift. Mercy gets left aside. We're glad they're around, but they're really not much use unless you're hurting. And Jesus would say, those people, if you're here today and you feel that, you feel, by the way, mercy, one commentator, Barclay, a guy named Barclay, said that mercy is getting in a person's skin. Which is important because God actually did that for us when he extended mercy to us, and we'll get back to that in just a minute. But you're one of those people, you get in people's skin. You not only identify with their pain, you feel it. And a lot of the times it feels like, oh man, it just feels like such a burden for you. And what Jesus would say is, blessed are you, I'm on your side, I am with you, I'm on your team. And that you will receive mercy. You will be shown the kind of mercy that is extended to you. And in fact, it is a characteristic of the kingdom of heaven that mercy would be shown. And those of us that are here that are not very merciful, Jesus' teaching that we looked at in Matthew 18 is very, very strong warning against some of the things that we reflect because of how much we have been forgiven. Now, he goes on to say that it's not only this, But it's an understanding that the kingdom of heaven has always operated this way. Hosea 6 says, "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice." This is an Old Testament prophet in the middle of the sacrificial system. And he says, I've desired mercy, not sacrifice, and an acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. And Jesus, when he's talking to the religious people of his day, he tells each of them on several different occasions, go figure out what this is, smarty pants. Oh, that's a loose translation. Go figure out what this is. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. That when there's an understanding of what God has done for us, remember I said that there's this getting into one's skin, that God, that's what the incarnation is. The incarnation is Jesus, God's Son, taking on flesh and becoming human on our behalf so that he could get in our skin. He could suffer as we suffer, and he could show mercy to us. In Hebrews, it says this very thing. Let me flip over to it. Hebrews chapter 2. Listen to this. It says, "For this reason he, Christ, had to be made like his brothers in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people." We're just like that servant who had a debt we could never pay. And that the kingdom of heaven should be characterized by a response to a great forgiveness extended to us, and then forgiveness towards other people, but not so that we would earn God's favor, not so that we would be blessed, but because of the great mercy that has been shown. Now, we'll get back to that. That's the hard part, is that how do you discern that, and how do you wrestle with that, and how do you make sure that that's not the motive behind what you're doing? It also says that blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I thought, pure in heart, this is a weird one, isn't it? Pure in heart. I mean, I get merciful, but I mean, technically, I know the people I know. No, I don't know anybody pure in heart. I mean, how does that work out? And so I tried to think, what does it look like in that situation? And that's why I shared with you the second story of the woe to the hypocrites. Because the same word for pure is clean. And my best wrap around this, and I'm just wrestling with it like the rest of you, but my best study says that it's this idea of integrity. It's this idea of what's represented on the outside is true on the inside. When you slice open an apple, what you get inside the apple is apple, not orange. When you slice open a watermelon, what you get inside the watermelon is watermelon. But the truth of the matter is that in many of our lives, sometimes if you slice this open, and we say we're a Christ follower, and we're here, and we carry our Bible, and we take good notes, and we're in a community group, and we give faithfully to good causes, but when you slice this open, what you get is something other than a Christ follower. There's not a match, really, with what's going on inside of our heart. And this purity, when you think of pure, don't think of as pure as in no sin. Think of just as integrity. That the inside of the cup is clean and represents the outside of the cup, which is also clean. Those kinds of people who have the kind of integrity that do the work that and you know what? Here's the truth. Christianity is really inconvenient if you're going to live this way. Let me give you, you're looking at me like, really? Yeah, really. You just had tax time. It's super inconvenient to be a person of integrity at tax time. There are so many things you could put down, and chances are no one would ever see. I mean, who are you that you would get audited? I mean, the chances are really very slim. Except for Christ sees. I mean, it's really inconvenient when you go to an office and you get stopped for speeding. Not that anybody in this room's ever had this, but personally I've had this situation where he says, did you know that you were speeding? That question that seems to be the one you guys are looking at me like you've never been stopped. Liars, you are liars, all of you. I know some of you have been stopped, and what they're going to ask, what's your hurry? Did you know that you were speeding? Well, what's the normal response? Oh, I mean, sometimes it might be true, but most of the time we knew we were speeding. Oh, no, officer. In fact, I'm sure I wasn't. It's inconvenient to be a believer in times like that. And I could go on and on and on about how if you live a life of integrity, there are some of you in this room that are struggling with living the life of integrity. And Jesus says, I'm on your side. When they ask you if you left early and you have to tell the truth because you're trying to be a person of integrity, I'm on your side. You get a ticket because you have to admit that you were wrong, I'm still on your side. I'm with you in those kinds of things. There are some who might be pure in heart who are just super naive. They just kind of always assume the best in people, and you always worry about them because they go out assuming, they're the kind of people who walk around with their wallet, half out like this as they walk around, or they're the kind of people who just assume that if people tell them that they have a bridge to sell them in Arizona, that's true, and they want to move in that direction. And in the midst of that, maybe that's the kind of pure in heart that some examples of. It's just an example of people who just assume the best in things. And life always seems to take advantage of them. And even in the midst of that, God would say, I'm on your side. I'm on your team. I'm with you. In the midst of this, even though we can't ask the question, are we merciful or are we pure in heart to gain God's favor, I think it's a good question to ask in terms of being a Christ follower, in terms of what it looks like to be a 640 disciple, which 640 means that the verse in Luke 640 that says when a student's fully trained, they'll be like their teacher, is that when we're moving towards Christ-likeness, we've committed to a lifestyle like that. It would be one that was known of mercy, not to gain God's favor, but because we have been shown great mercy. It would be one that's moving towards integrity and purity, where the outside and the inside match up, because Christ is not so much concerned about the outside as he is the inside. And so I would ask you, in the midst of your own struggle to follow after Christ, as you look at these Beatitudes and the poor in spirit and the mourning and the meek and the hungering and thirsting for righteousness, for those who are merciful and those who are pure in heart, you find yourself in one of those camps. God ponies up beside you and says, I'm on your side. And if you're out there and you're one of those people who wants to keep a list and say, I've got to do better here, I've got to do better here, not to earn God's favor, but because you already have God's favor, would you do that? Now, I want to take some time just to kind of flesh this out. And I don't know how to do this other than just to let's talk about it. So let's take some questions. I got some guys that are going to come forward, I think, and grab a mic. Nobody wants to, but somebody will eventually. They're over here. Okay, come on. And then if you have a question, it could be from this week or the other weeks that we've been working our way through in terms of flip, as Jesus is kind of flipping things, and you've been working through it in your own, or some things that I've said. Let's talk about it. How does it play out? Here's one. There's one over there. Yeah, it's turned on. You don't need to do anything with it. Okay, so we got a question right here in the middle. If y'all could walk a little slower, it'd be really good. Well, quick! Jiminy! I said I didn't do the merciful thing really well. Thank you, gals. I'm halfway playing.
How does a servant repay his debt when he's sitting in prison?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
How does a servant repay his debt when he's sitting in prison?
Well, he doesn't. He doesn't. That's the whole. The guy's not. He's just expending out justice. You owed me. You can't pay me, so you never could. Unless your family comes to your aid, you could never get it paid. You can't work. So you're right. It's a situation that unless he has someone move on his behalf, he's not going to be able to repay it. Good question. Oh, great.
It says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." What does it mean for the people with integrity will see God? What does that look like?
I think what it is these are statements of blessing afterwards that are very particular about how it's going to, even though life doesn't seem to work for you now, this is what your reward will be. The difficult part about the Beatitudes, let me just tell you that the Beatitudes were taught in the context of a sermon. So it would be like taking my first 10 minutes of what I say 1,000 years from now, which I assure you no one will ever do, and then taking 3 weeks to talk about the first 10 minutes. There's going to be some things, some rewards that Jesus is going to talk about afterwards, and some very particular things that follow. But right now, what we've got to make sure we get our hands around is that the reality is God is on our side, and that the people whose lives don't seem to work, you will receive blessing, and it will be tangible. And so he lists tangible things with the bookends, kind of an inclusio of the kingdom. You will, for the kingdom of heaven is yours. The very last beatitude says, for the kingdom of heaven is yours, which gives us a real hint that it's all about, there will come a time when everything will be made right, when the kingdom of heaven is joined with the kingdom of earth, which we talked about once. Great question. Yeah, right here.
Do you think that his lesson was also to have other people recognize that quality in other people and to appreciate the meek, and instead of like taking advantage of them?
I don't think that's his purpose. I think that that's true, but I don't think that's his purpose inside of this teaching here. What I'm trying to make sure we grab is, what was Jesus teaching when he gave this sermon? And I believe with all my heart what he was teaching was, you think life only works for the strong and the powerful and the people up front, and I'm telling you the kingdom of heaven expands way beyond that, and it's much broader than that. Certainly, we should appreciate those people that have those gifts. And once we recognize the blessing and the individual recognition of Jesus' teaching on them, we should give more honor to them. But I don't think that's what he's necessarily trying to do. I think what he's trying to do is he's in a crowd of people who mostly life is not working at all. The Romans are oppressing them. They're being taxed beyond anything you can imagine. You think taxes are heading in a bad direction here. We're talking 85 and 90% tax rates in Jesus' day. And they're having to sell their land that's been in their families for centuries because they can't even make their payments. And they're not just selling their land, they're selling themselves into slavery. And he's looking out and saying, you don't think life's working, but I will assure you the kingdom of heaven is advancing, even though it may not look like it.
How do you balance the mercy of giving somebody that's hungry a fish and teaching them to fish?
Well, I think teaching them to fish is a great mercy. So, this is how we try to do it here. When it's someone, we give both to relief efforts of people who are dying and relief efforts of people who are going to die, if not trained, if their situation doesn't train. So I think they're both acts of great mercy. What we'll try to do is those people who are really in dire straits, they're children who can't fend for themselves and cannot earn a wage and will certainly die if they don't get money, we dump money straight into them. We put money straight into food and get it right to them as best we can. And that certainly moves into adults as well. There are some adult situations in the world where there's hunger just beyond what can be reached. Haiti was a great example of that this past year, and we've responded with tens of thousands of dollars. But there's another thing in terms of what we might do, and that would be, rather than just to give aid, in some situations we might encourage trade. So we might do things like microfinancing, where we loan people money so that they can go and start a business, hoping that they'll pay it back so that we could loan it again, but they may not, and that's really not going to be a big deal for us. So the whole wrestling match between aid and trade is what we're now starting to get our hands around and trying to come to grips with. And we've got a group of people called the Go Board here who are constantly balancing how much of this can be development And how much of this is just what we need to do in terms of just flat out aid? If we don't get food, if we don't get medicine to these folks, if we don't get water to them, they're going to die. And I think we have to do both. That's a great question. Okay, wait for a mic. There you go. Thanks. It works better if you hold it to your mouth. There you go.
Sorry. I'm naturally impatient by definition. And I'm in a work environment that people will take every advantage in the world. And other people will, like me, the math doesn't equal 0. You know, I get to the end of the month and it doesn't equal 0. On one hand, I know I'm doing what God wants me to do. On the other hand, as a human being, even though I'm not taxed at 85%, I go, God, there's a 0 here, you know, and I know how your economy works, but how do I represent you well in the midst of knowing the math doesn't work?
Right.
Because as a human being, that's just not easy.
Well, did everybody hear him? Because he was kind of moving in and out, and I understand. It's kind of hard to, but what he's saying is that the impatience of this promise for blessing and the promise for things eventually working out, and yet this reality of the world and how it's still not working yet. And how do we live in that? We live in the daily struggle. This is not a teaching that says, don't worry, Jesus is going to make it easy soon. There's nothing in this teaching that says this. What it says, and when we get to the rest of the sermon, what it's going to say is, if you will engage me at the heart level, I will be with you. Now, he's with people who still are poor. That's the whole purpose of the Beatitudes. He's with people who still can't pay their rent. This is not, if I get my life to get, see, this is what we think. We always, as Americans, think that if we do this, then we earn this. And as we earn it, it moves us towards something that means blessing monetarily or blessing in terms of things. And we've got to resist that urge. It's not a blessing. I wish it were, but it's not. I wish that if you were honest, you'd always have work. But there are honest people without work in this room. Amen? I wish that if you'd always treated people kindly, you would always be treated in kind that way. But there are people in this room who are kind, and this week we're treated unkind. Amen? And so we've got to make sure that we're doing, because we're not doing, see, if you're doing it to gain people's favor or if you're doing it to gain God's favor, you've missed it. That's why I think he's saying, those of you where it ain't working, God is still with you and he's on your side. And for some of you, that might mean blessing and relief. For others of you, it just mean comfort and strength. But there will come a day, and that's the inclusio of both, the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of earth will one day come together, and it will be made right, and the month will work out, the math will work, and you'll walk. And until that day, we're left to wrestle. And I think one of the beauty of the wrestling is that Christ is most exhibited in us when we wrestle, not when we get it all right. Who wants to be around people that are all right? I mean, seriously, you know those people that think they're all right. You don't want to be around them. What if you actually were all right? You might be so discouraging to be around them. They'd always respond in a godly response. They always had the right answers. They always knew the right verse. They always had enough money. They always just did everything right. Who wants to be around them? Not me. I think Christ is most exhibited and most glorified when you, as his child, will say, though he slay me, still I love him. Because a doubting and skeptical world looks around and says, I get it. I get it when God gives you $1 million. I get it why you sing praises and wear bling, big crosses on your neck and say, just want to thank Jesus Christ before I say anything else. I mean, I get that. Everybody looks at those things on TV and they just go, gag me, I get it. But they don't get it when you do the things that's purposely to make sure that you're a person of integrity, and yet it costs you in the end. They don't get that. And that's where Paul says, in my weaknesses, then I am strong. And there's Jesus in the midst of it. Good question, bro. I wish I had a better answer.
So
Hey.
we, as a society where we live, are blessed anyways. Just financially compared to the rest of the world, I mean, that's just the way it is. How do we, as a church, kind of forfeit some of those blessings to get to a point where we can be merciful, because the world doesn't bless the merciful. The world says, I bless the just. And everything's working for us being just as it is. So how do we get to a point where we can be comfortable without some of those, I guess, worldly blessings is what I'm talking about. And I mean, how do we get to that point where we can forfeit some of those things to be merciful and to go away from the world?
Yeah. Well, I think the quick answer for you is we obey when he prompts. When he moves us to do something, we obey with that. And it costs us. Let me just give you a clear example of this, and this is not a statement about financials, but mostly this would be in a financial area. So if you'll look at the statement inside of your bulletin, we're $100,000 behind in our budget this year. But at Christmas, we gave away over $100,000 to somebody else. So there are things that we've chosen to do without so that we could meet the needs of those who were suffering in immediate ways. And now, are we still blessed? We're still so blessed. Don't misunderstand that as, whoa, look at us, we're so cool. But I mean, we're doing what we're obeying where we're prompted to give. Because I think what that's going to mostly look like is sacrifice. It's going to be giving away something that you'd really like to keep for yourself. And so we'll do that. Now, I hope that it's also showing up not just as a community of us here collectively, but it's showing up also as individuals out there in the community, where you go by someone who has a flat on the road, and it's going to cost you to stop and help them with that flat. You're going to get dirty. You're probably going to sweat a little bit. Some grease might get on your britches. And, it's going to cost you. You might even be late. But if you sense the Spirit of God in you prompting you to stop, then you can do no other. And be what Christ is calling us to be, then you need to pull on over and get greasy and get dirt on your britches. And it'll cost you. And that's just one example. You guys get what I'm talking about. It's going to cost you over and over and over again. And because if we're just doing it collectively, it's hypocrisy. If I pray to God that we're not just generous as a community of people here. If you're not also generous as an individual, I'm failing as one of your leaders. Because coming together and doing something that you're not individually is called hypocrisy. That's just religion. So this isn't just a cost. It doesn't just cost us here. I see them dimming the lights, telling me that it's time to shut up. Got it. Thanks. Because I can no longer see you back there in the corner. There you are. Hi. So I hope that it's costing us both collectively and individually. And as we do that faithfully, then I believe that God will honor us and move us ahead. I hope that's a good answer. If you wanted to know how is that costing us individually in terms of decisions that we're making, I would encourage you to email Steve Mueller and just say, what are some of the things, the ramifications where we're giving away the money that we're giving away and what we do without here so that we can do that. And I promise you we're making decisions like that almost every single week. And we're glad to. It's not a complaint. Okay, I'm obviously at time to, it is a little bit late. So we need to pray for the offering now. And so thanks, ladies, for doing that. And come on up and pray for our offering, and then we'll